Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you while you were home alone? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Guy came to the door and said he was an electric company guy and just needed to see a dial. He had the wrong name for who lives in the house, by the way. He then slowly pushed his way in and said, I just need to see around the corner until he was fully in. Luckily, my dad came back and then he left. I used to struggle to sleep and be a very light sleeper. I was semi-conscious and heard what I thought was my garden gate open, shrugged it off and tried to go back to sleep. Heard another strange noise from outside, decided to look out the window onto the rear garden. I could not see anything but my gate was open. I was certain I had closed it. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow from the streetlight and looked directly down to see two men trying to break the lock on my back door. I shouted, and luckily they both ran off. Didn't sleep properly for about 2 months after that. I went to bed around midnight on Halloween night, and about 5 minutes later heard the worst howling or screaming outside my bedroom window I've ever heard, like a woman being murdered. I peeked through the curtain and saw a fox howling in the middle of my yard, in a circle of moonlight like it was a spotlight. It was scary and spooky. Hasn't happened again, and this was 20 years ago. Had some lowlifes saw off the tubing for my gas line. They were after the copper. My younger brother and I were home alone. We were still kids at the time, and the thought that someone would be stupid enough to do this didn't cross my mind. It was around midnight when I heard what sounded like scratching against the walls, which is scary of itself. I almost shit my pants. Every time I went to check it out, the sound stopped. It didn't occur to me that it could be people messing with tubing because it was a good 15 feet off the ground, and whenever I leaned over to see out to street from my roof, there was nothing. No people, no animal, no trash, nothing. I have no idea how they scattered so fast. This continued for about 40 minutes. Then I started to smell something like a dead animal. It was overwhelming, the smell that started to permeate the house. Now I know gas and death have a similar smell. I opened most all of my windows because of the stench, and that is probably what saved our lives at the end because we went to sleep since I couldn't see what was wrong. We woke up to my uncle body slamming the front door until it broke down. He was screaming our names. The whole street smelled of gas. I had a raging headache, was feeling really nauseated, and couldn't understand what was going on for a minute or two. Our next-door neighbor had sounded the alarm early in the morning as she was getting ready for work. She called my mother, but she was on vacation, so she then called my uncle instead, who hauled ass to our house. We could have suffocated. We could have exploded, just because some assholes were after a few dollars worth of copper tubing. Even when they obviously didn't give a shit about the people inside, they didn't even think about themselves dying because of their idiocy. A spark could have ended us all. It still baffles me to this day. I had just moved into a new apartment and my roommate was working a late shift. It was around 10 p.m. and I was on the phone with my high school best friend. I suddenly got an eerie feeling and told her that I felt I needed to go make sure my door was locked. As soon as I made sure the door was locked and turned around, someone began loudly banging at the door, yelling, "Bitch, let me in!" He proceeded to pound loudly on the door and trying to get in, knocking something off the wall. My friend was still on the phone and said, "How did you know that was going to happen? You need to call the cops." The man ended up getting arrested and apparently knew the former tenants. That was 20 years ago, and I'm still psycho about locking my doors at all hours of the day. Not really scary so much as startling, but I used to live in a studio apartment on the first floor in a bad part of town. One night, at like 1 a.m, I was sitting on my couch watching TV and smoking a bowl. The place was kinda small, so the window to the right of me was pretty close. It faced the next building. Between them was like a 6-foot alley. All of a sudden, a light shines onto me through the window, and it's a member of SWAT pointing a shotgun at me. I'm just sitting there stoned as hell, with the bowl in my hand. We stare at each other for a second. He waves at me and leaves. Turns out they were raiding the building next to me for whatever reason. Mid-2020. I was living alone as my mom had just passed shortly before COVID struck. We were still in that period of uncertainty regarding COVID. All the streets were empty, everything was very quiet and eerie. It was a cold, rainy night around 3 a.m. when suddenly I wake up with my doorbell ringing. It was not uncommon for me to dream of my doorbell, so I just ignored and went back to sleep. A few minutes later, there it goes again. I woke up immediately and sat in bed thinking it could be a drunkard or some random teen from the neighborhood. I waited for a moment and it didn't ring again, so I went back to sleep. Once again, at this moment I was fully alert. I sneakily went up to our living room window and took a peek outside. Nobody. It rang again. My heart was racing. I called out to anyone that could be there. No response. Where I live, there's walls and tall gates in front of every house, so I thought there could be someone hiding behind my front wall and ringing the doorbell. I imagined it could be a burglar waiting to ambush me if I went outside. I snuck to the dining room, which had a side door, which was a little more hidden and silent than our main door. I went outside in the rain and took a peek over the wall to the front yard. It was higher relative to the street level, not a single soul. The doorbell rang again. I realized it was probably an electrical problem, and it was ringing itself every 5 minutes. Was at home and kept hearing thumping upstairs. I thought one of my roommates was home and was in the bathroom. It was right above me where the noise was coming from. I kept hearing footsteps and shuffling around like they were dragging their feet. A few hours later, my roommate shows up. I told her about it and she brushed it off as pipes or whatever. We joked that the apartment was haunted and had a laugh. She headed upstairs and I hear a scream that turned my blood cold. She bolts downstairs and into the car. I followed and we called the police. My roommate said she reached into the closet to turn on a light and felt a hand on her arm and a man's voice pleading with her for help. Police were notified but showed up an hour later. They searched the apartment and found no one. The deadbolt to the back door and all the windows were locked. The only route of escape was through the front, but there was no way he would have run by us without being seen. So when you have a dad that occasionally sold drugs, every so often someone he pissed off will come a-knockin'. I found this out the hard way when I was 9 years old and a very big and very scary looking dude tried to kick in my back door. Thankfully, I had a big and scary dog that scared him off. But the way my dad acted when I told him I'd never seen him turn as white as a ghost like that before. So this was back in the very early 90s, and this dude was apparently strongly suspected of doing... Just gonna reread that paragraph, my phone rang. Yeah, having those dogs there clearly was good. That's a scary situation. I hope your father learned a lesson from this, but I don't know if he did, but I'm just glad you're okay. So this was back in the very early 90s, and this dude was apparently strongly suspected of doing terrible things to the kids of people he was mad at. When I was older, I asked my dad about this dude again, and he basically told me that, yeah, the dude was mad at the quality, specifically the lack thereof, of whatever he sold him, and the dude had every intention of kidnapping me, doing things to me I can't mention here without a ban, and then subsequently selling me to other people that would continue to do these things to me. Also, he was HIV positive, so yeah, thanks Dad for nearly getting me kidnapped, trafficked, infected with HIV, and probably killed because you sold the wrong guy some bad shit. I was taking care of the family dogs while everyone was on holiday, and one of them peed on the black sheepskin rug, so I put it in the washer, which I then forgot about for 3 days. Unfortunately, I had not long watched The Grudge, which absolutely shat me up anyway. So a feature of the demon ghost in the film is to have her black hair appear to come out of the plug hole and other places. I went to put a wash on 3 days later. I kneel down to open the washer door, and this black, wet mass of hair starts slowly slumping out toward me. I was so scared that my knees were frozen to the floor, and my top half was almost seizure-like as I couldn't figure out how to flee. So I ended up falling backwards instead while my dogs were in a flap over the confusion behind me. I realized what I had done and just laid there basking in my idiocy for a while and comforting the dog. When I was a teenager, my mom had this creepy, controlling friend on and off. Had a weird fixation on teenage girls, and one night while I was 17, I went with my mom to the hospital, and she ended up having to stay there overnight. I had work the next morning, so she called up said friend to take me home, and by this point, it was about midnight. The ride home was weird because he sat next to me in the back seat while the sketchy couple my mom and I never met drove up front. They smoked weed while driving. The friend offered me a cigarette, and I took it, planning to give it to my mom later. He came to his senses and snatched it back, but still, it was all around an uncomfortable car ride, for when I got out, he insisted he follow me to the door. By this point, it was about 2 a.m. Mom was gone, brother was gone, but I can't remember where to. The guy walked me right to the door. I unlocked it, he grabbed the handle and said he was just going to take a quick peek inside, because he was disturbingly curious about what the inside of our house looked like, to the point we absolutely did not let him inside. So it's 2 a.m., I'm 17 with this older dude I don't trust after a weird car ride home. He tried to force his way into the house, and luckily he was a weak guy, and I managed to push him away from the door a few times until finally he said something along the lines, "What the? You're weird," and stormed off to his buddies in the car. I went in after he left and locked and checked both doors so quickly. He was bizarre. It was about 5 years ago, and I don't let people walk me to the door anymore. I was washing my dishes when I saw a guy covered in blood jumped over my fence and ran to my neighbor's backyard, followed by 2 police officers doing the same. They all continued to run while I got out and followed all of them because I was curious about what was going on. Turned out the poor guy had tried to kill himself by stabbing himself repeatedly. He stopped on the lawn of a funeral home, which was kind of sadly ironic. That's when I saw the 2 huge knives. They talked to him for a while, and apparently they took him to the hospital. I think about him from time to time, and I hope he's okay. Wasn't home alone necessarily, but it was 2 a.m. and the folks were dead asleep. My room was on the other side of the house, so I may as well have been. There was a pretty bad storm outside, and I was just on my PC playing Eve. The landline phone starts ringing. Now, this isn't uncommon during a storm for it to ring once or twice at random, I guess due to lightning hitting close to the vicinity of phone lines, but this time it keeps ringing. Eventually, I pick it up and ask who's calling. The second I do, I feel something standing behind me. Not just a, "Hey, is something there?" It's the kind of overwhelming presence that freezes you in place and keeps you from turning around to see it. There's a voice on the phone, but it sounds like trying to listen to somebody screaming underwater. This goes on for about 5 minutes, and the phone cuts out, and whatever I felt behind me disappeared immediately. The creepier thing with the phone is it was a set of wireless handhelds, and there was one in my folks' room as well for some reason that never heard it. That house was one of the 3 fairly isolated lots on a mountain in a very rural part of Tennessee. I was in a boutique hotel in an extraordinarily old house in London. Our room had 2 doors right after each other, so it was like an extra room that was only just big enough to stand up in. My husband wanted to go see some friends of his I didn't know, so he decided he'd be fine to go alone. I decided to stay home, drink the white wine from the minibar, and read a filthy romantic novel. His phone didn't work in the UK, so he couldn't call me unless he was somewhere with Wi-Fi. So he looked up directions, took a screenshot, and went out. He initially went out on a Tuesday evening and texted me from a Starbucks Wi-Fi when he got close to the meeting place. But it turned out he got the day wrong, so we turned around and came home. He went out the next night to the same meeting place. My husband is shy and had never met the internet friends before, so I was only expecting him to be gone for like 2 hours. By this time, he was gone for 4.5 hours, and it was almost midnight. I was starting to panic. He couldn't call me. He somehow got lost. He got murdered. His friends had murdered him. I was going to have to tell the London Metropolitan Police that I let my husband of less than a year out into a city he was in for the first time, with a phone that didn't work, to meet people neither of us knew, and now he was dead in a ditch. I was going to end up in an Agatha Christie novel, and Poirot was going to disapprove of me. I was lying in bed, listening to a podcast quietly, trying to think about what I should do, when I heard a soft knock on the outer door. I wasn't 100% sure I heard it, but I decided to get my dressing gown on and answer it just in case my husband couldn't get the key from the front desk or something. While I was putting on my dressing gown, I heard the knock on the outer door again, louder this time. Loud enough that I called out that I was coming. Of course, when I go through the outer door, the hallway was empty. The hotel was ancient, and every step creaked. It also wasn't crowded, I rarely saw other guests at all. It absolutely wasn't a case of another guest knocking on the wrong door, realizing and leaving. I would have heard them. I really got badly spooked then, because obviously this meant my husband was 109% dead in a ditch, and this was his soul coming back to say goodbye. In the end, he came home absolutely fine. He just hit it off with the friends and forgot to text me. I never found an explanation for what happened, but that's the most spooked I've been while home alone. Except for now, because I creeped myself out so bad that my husband coming home from work made me jump out of my skin. My kitchen door's doorbell shorted out in the middle of the night. My dogs react to doorbells loudly. Front door is ding dong, kitchen is ding. The dogs came unglued and ran to the kitchen barking like death was there. I opened the door and no one was there, so I went back to bed. Then it happened again, so I tiptoed to the door and flung it open. No one there, so I ran to the front door. No one there, ran back to the kitchen door. No one there. Screamed expletives. I'm on a very isolated farm at the end of 3/8 of a mile driveway through forest with no visible neighbors. After I screamed, I headed back to the bed and the kitchen door dinged before I was out of the room. I put on shoes, got my .22 and let my dogs out, and we quick-stepped around the whole house. I was starting to think maybe it was a raccoonish animal or something like a nocturnal bird pecking bugs off the button since it's lit up. But as soon as I stepped back into my kitchen, it dinged again. I decided it was a doorbell part amuck, so pulled the bell part apart and pulled all the wires loose, and the issue was resolved until my husband came home. He was grumpy about having to figure out how it went back together, and even grumpier when he used his man eyes to look at the inside of the bell over and saw it had a battery backup, and apparently one of the batteries was a dud. He figured how to reattach all the wires, and technology had progressed to have batteries with much longer life, and it was good again. This was years ago, like 0304. I was like 15 and was left at home alone to watch the dogs all weekend while my parents and siblings went to a soccer tournament a few states away. It was like 1 to 1:30 a.m. I was still awake and playing Morrowind on my computer that I had lugged down and hooked to the big TV in the family room. Lots of cords and connections back then. Mid-game, I hear this insanely loud beep from behind me in the kitchen. Now, I had not gotten up in hours. Dinner was pizza rolls or something in the oven, but again, hours ago. And both the oven and microwave were showing the clock and not some timer. I figured I'd heard it and went back to playing. A few minutes go by and one of the dogs is crying now in the kitchen. Then I hear it again, quiet like an old digital watch going off, but it kept getting louder and louder as it was happening. Like it was coming up from a deep hole or something, but muffled like it was underwater. As soon as it got to the loudest, it was the last time. I heard it. There was a loud boom-like noise outside, and the older neighborhood behind my parents' newer subdivision went dark. What I figured happened after seeing what caused the boom noise the next day was a transformer was shorting out, causing some weird electrical ghost shit in the air, and it was making something in my house beep, and it stopped when the transformer finally exploded. Never happened again since. My parents still live there. Fell at work while I had undiagnosed cancer, had a tumor compressing my vein and a small blood clot. Was sore as hell and walking got harder and harder. Woke up the next day in shit tons of pain and my leg was crazy swollen and I could barely move it. Went to the ER with all these classic symptoms and a leg about 50% increased in size. Sent home with I guess you have a bruise. Had no idea what was going on, while I could barely get around for 10 days while my parents were out of the country. The ice baths I tried to reduce the swelling could have killed me. If it wasn't for my psych at the time, having been a surgeon, and seeing all the things going on, how long said, appointment is cancelled, go to the ER. Had a friend drive, and he took me to a hospital where my psych knew a vascular doctor. He was so worried he cleared his day and arrived 20 minutes behind us. I've gotten through the ER fast, but this was otherworldly levels of holy shit. I was terrified and had no idea what was happening.